Hi there. So I'm Rob Solly. I'm Director of Research Partnerships in Improbable's Defence Division. I've spent the last 29 years trying to apply modelling and simulation to advise decision makers on what I think is the most logical thing to do. But I've always been intrigued by how to equip a decision maker to decide what is the right thing to do. And my experience has showed that there's quite a bit of room for improvement in the conventional approaches that we use to inform decision makers. In particular, I think we need to help decision makers to learn how to manage complex systems. And as General Tom CS this morning mentioned, we need to help them build understanding, not just to provide them with data, facts and evidence. Next slide, please. So today, I'd like to explore whether AI employed within synthetic environments could actually help. We believe that these technologies are already helping us make faster and more effective decisions, but can we use AI to make more ethical ones too? Next slide. So Improbable, as you may well know, is a games company at heart. We try to make it easier for people to make more extraordinary multiplayer games. 2.5 billion people play video games, and as these multiplayer games get more sophisticated, it seems to me that game worlds have the potential to transform how we all work, entertain ourselves and connect one another. Just as they stand to transform our societies, though, I believe that they have the ability to transform how we ensure our security too. Synthetic environments are simulations of the real world that we use to help make better decisions. We learn, after all, through play. You can experience your world from on high, at a strategic level, and you can look down on it through graphs and data, or you can fly through it like this visualization here. You can drive through it, sail through it, fight your way through it at street level. Your actions in a synthetic environment have consequences, and thanks to modeling and simulation, you can experience for yourself how different decisions and actions will play out a minute from now, a week from now, a year from now. These virtual worlds let us experiment in a virtual world before taking action in the real one. Slide. Governments and militaries are already using synthetic environments from many suppliers to improve the way that they operate by exploring challenges, understanding options, and surfacing overlooked vulnerabilities and unintuitive opportunities. For example, some examples here, we've looked at enhancing operational planning, top left, to generate better informed plans more rapidly. But also, ultimately, this will help deliver more robust and affordable plans. And we're already seeing some of the benefits that General Tom talked about at the beginning, about starting to bring some of these stovepipes from J1 to J9 together in this space. But synthetic environments are also being used for collective training very, very widely, helping people learn through failing in a safe environment. And simulations being used to design more effective, perhaps less disruptive policy interventions. The example bottom left shows a COVID-19 spread model. And bottom right, we can actually start to take synthetic environments to optimize the design or to design robust systems, for instance, critical national infrastructure in this example. So these already have a very wide application. But one of the things that intrigues me is about whether, if they can help us to do things better, can they also help us to do better things? Slide, please. So we heard from General Tom this morning that the UK Ministry of Defence is planning its own digital transformation, and synthetic environments can play a vital role as part of this. We see that there's a need for a digital nervous system around the MOD's proposed digital backbone. Building on the backbone's shared data and AI that will help decision makers understand the world as it was and as it is, simulations will help decision makers to understand the world as it could be in the future. These three elements, data, AI and simulation, they're not separate, they're inextricably linked. So, for example, we use data and simulation to train AI. A lot of what we heard about earlier is AI that's being trained in some form of a simulation. We use data and AI within the simulation. And we also use AI and simulation to generate data that can be useful for decision makers. So these three things are inextricably linked. But the digital nervous system ultimately is there to support, in my mind anyway, a human brain. in making decisions by providing them with the tools that they need to gain deeper understanding of complex, ambiguous, dynamic situations. Next slide, please. So I'm going to keep you busy here, Luca, apologies for this, but basically just going to step through a few examples of what we use AI for. Synthetic environments can use AI in multiple ways. So the community of companies that build synthetic environments works with a very wide range of academic partners and AI partners. Slide. So for example, there's the kind of AI that helps us fill gaps in our input data. For instance, we've been proud to work with Adaga, who are on next, on Strategic Command's SSE technology demonstrator to explore how AI can improve operational decision support. Slide. But AI is also used to help a user to explain and to understand what's happening in the simulation. We've heard about explanatory AI already. Next slide. And there's AI inside most simulations as well. So we need to represent human behavior and the behavior of enemy forces and friendly ones. Now, put together, these three applications of AI provide a synthetic environment that can be used by a user to help them gain better understanding of how to operate in a future world. And that is extremely useful in itself. But there's a fourth application I'm going to talk about today, which can help transform the benefits of synthetic environments. Slide. So this fourth application is a kind of AI that can play the game itself. And that can help us explore the options that are available to us, but also to understand the cascading consequences that each of our potential options might have. Ultimately, if you vary enough of these things, you can search for better, more robust tactics, strategies, and even design new systems that can achieve them. So developing any of these AIs raises some really tricky technical challenges, but it also raises some intriguing ethical ones. There's already been plenty of discussion today about the ethics of using AI to create unbiased data or to interpret data. So I'm going to concentrate on the ethical challenges posed by the third and the fourth of these examples in yellow here on the screen. But I'm also going to finish by talking about the ethical opportunities that synthetic environments offer. Slide, please. So we use AI to bring the world alive and make the game realistic. Next slide, please. We're working with Discovery Machine to use AI to represent the behavior of civilians, and we've integrated VTMax computer-generated forces. But representing the tactical and strategic cunning that you'd expect to find in real-world red and blue teams is really very, very challenging. We've already heard today about DeepMind's AlphaGo, and they've since moved on to master StarCraft. But in parallel, we're working with DSTL and exciting companies like Rowden and Montview to understand how to represent military tactics. The development of these AI can prompt some really quite interesting ethical challenges. Next slide, please. So the challenge here, the first challenge here is, should we limit AIs to behave ethically in our synthetic environments and follow the rules of law? Or should we take a more pragmatic approach, a more realistic approach? Well, my view is that we should faithfully represent both blue forces and our adversaries, red forces. We shouldn't have some kind of idealized form of player in our synthetic environments. And to do so, this requires our AI to represent a range of ethical codes and a range of humans' abilities to stick to them. So, for instance, on the human side of this, DSTL runs a fantastic course called Playing Red for human players of war games. We need our own version of that for computer-generated forces. But I think this has been covered already today, but I would just point out that there's a subtlety that's really important here. We may perceive our opponent's actions as unethical, but they may well be adhering very strictly to a moral code of their own, just one that is different from ours. And it's those moral codes that we need to represent in the simulations. Next slide. So as well as helping us to play games, AI also offers us the potential to enhance real-world decision-making by running robust simulations over and over and seeking optimal or robust solutions. For example, we heard about DARPA's work, Alpha Dogfight, and also their work with DSTL at the moment, looking at running Command PE, which is a campaign level model. What they're doing is they're learning new ways of operating in those environments. But we could also use synthetic environments to help designers find optimum system designs, not just how to operate, but what to operate with that would be most efficient or effective or robust to a range of uncertain parameters. But at the same time, those approaches could be used in a decision support tool to provide advice to a military commander, to provide them with options for achieving their goals. And this opens up a further range of interesting ethical questions. Slide, please. So the challenge here is, should we allow those artificial intelligence to present unethical options to decision makers and flag them as such? Or should we just limit the options that they're able to present to those considered to be ethical in advance? And if so, whose ethics should we use? And what if this constraint limits the AI to giving the commander several ways to lose rather than a way to win? These will be hard choices which users will need to tailor to suit their needs, but it's worth considering now whether it's better for the decision maker to be presented with a broader suite of options where a mixture of ethical, legal and operational metrics can be assessed and compared, or whether we should constrain those options to ones that might be considered ethical before the situation is fully understood. I would suggest that in training for and in managing some very high risk, time critical circumstances, that the AI should actually present the decision maker with the trolley problem that Professor Ian Bryant mentioned earlier, rather than pre-deciding the answer for them. The more that we dig into these technical and ethical challenges, the clearer it becomes that AI in synthetic environments can illuminate the potential cost of a decision, but I would argue that in most situations they shouldn't make the decision for us. Rather, I think that AI and simulation can help ensure that these things remain in human hands. Slide, please. So I'd like to finish on a positive note. Perhaps the most exciting opportunity here is that of using synthetic environments to help decision makers to learn how to behave ethically when they're challenged by opponents with different ethics, or perhaps when they're presented with opportunities to do things that could have far-reaching but hard to predict consequences that may be against our ethical principles. So I would argue that synthetic environments could help us to become more ethical, because what they and all the technologies that power them are really good at doing is helping us to apply uniquely human characteristics, imagination, experience, intuition and judgment, and even our sense of right and wrong. And in doing so, they can help us keep our personnel safer. Maybe they could even also help us to limit conflict, both in scale and lethality. Slide, please. So to circle back to where I started, in the contemporary battle space of grey zone operations, more complex and more ambiguous than ever, it's increasingly difficult for decision makers to know what's the most logical thing to do, let alone what's the right thing to do. But I'm confident that AI can help us to navigate that situation more confidently, and also that when AI is combined with synthetic environments, as I've described, it can also help us to navigate the more difficult moral questions that we face in these circumstances, and to understand the ethical consequences of our decisions by letting us experience them in a safe to fail environment. I think that just as AI can help our governments and militaries to thrive in a complex, ambiguous strategic context, it can also help them to get used to navigating equally complex, equally ambiguous moral landscapes. Thank you very much.